Nadia rode behind her father as he traveled across the desert from oasis to oasis, seeking Hamed. Shepherds told them of seeing a great white stallion fleeing before the pillars of wind that stirred the sand, and they said that the horse carried no rider. What does this mean? What does this mean? The pillars of wind that stirred the sand. And also, the horse that carries no rider. If you remember, Hamed on the following page, the page before that we read, it said Hamed mounted his father's great white stallion. It's not looking good, is it? Passing merchants, their camels laden with spices and sweets for the bazaar, told of the emptiness of the desert they had crossed. Tribesmen, strangers, everyone whom Tariq asked sighed and gazed into the desert, saying, "Such is the will of Allah." Who is Allah? Allah is the name of the God in the Islamic religion. So they're saying that probably Hamed is gone, is dead, and that it was the will of their God, Allah, that it happened. At last Tariq knew in his heart that his favorite son, Hamed, had been claimed, as other Bedouin before him, by the drifting sands, and he told Nadia what he knew, that Hamed was dead. So how was he killed? How do they think he was killed? In a sandstorm? Nadia screamed and wept and stamped the sand, crying, "Not even Allah will take Hamed from me," until her father could bear no more and sternly bade her to silence. Nadia's grief knew no bounds. She walked blindly through the oasis, neither seeing nor hearing those who would console her. And Tariq was silent. For days he sat inside his tent, speaking not at all, and barely tasting the meals set before him. Now, take a look at this. How does Nadia deal with the death of her brother, as opposed to Tariq dealing with the death of his son? Compare, contrast. Then, on the 7th day, Tariq came out of his tent. He called all his people to him, and when they were assembled, he spoke. "From this day forward," he said, "let no one utter Hamed's name. Punishment shall be swift for those who would remind me of what I have lost." Hamed's mother wept at the decree. The people of the clan looked at one another uneasily. All could see the hardness that had settled on the sheik's face and the coldness in his eyes, and so they said nothing, but they obeyed. Now let's talk for a minute. What was the sheik like before this happened? Do you remember? Let's go back. Nadia's father, the sheik Tariq, whose kindness and graciousness caused his name to be praised in every tent, did not know what to do with his willful daughter. So before this event happened, he was kind and gracious. And what does gracious mean? That's our vocab word. Pleasant, courteous, and generous. Okay, so he was a really sweet, nice guy before all this happened. And now he's become what I would call bitter. He's bitter. Can you understand why he's bitter? Sure, I can. I get it. He's angry. He's hurt. It's all those things rolled into one, right? He's grieving over the loss of his son. He doesn't understand it. It's terrible. Nadia, too, did as her father decreed, though each day held something to remind her of Hamed. As she passed her brothers at play, she remembered games Hamed had taught her. As she walked by the women weaving patches for the tents and heard them talking and laughing, she remembered tales Hamed had told her and how they had made her laugh. And as she watched the shepherds with their flock, she remembered the little black lamb Hamed had loved. Each memory brought Hamed's name to Nadia's lips, but she stilled the sound, and each time she did so, her unhappiness grew, until finally she could no longer contain it. She wept and raged at anyone and anything that crossed her path. Soon everyone at the oasis fled at her approach, and she was more lonely than she had ever been before. How is Nadia handling this decree that her father, the sheik, has made? What kind of conflict is she feeling? She's obeying, right? She's not mentioning his name, but in her mind, she's having an internal conflict. Yes? Because in her mind, she's remembering all these things, and each time she remembers it, she wants to talk about it. But she can't. And so it's making her kind of crazy, right? She just freaks out on anyone and anybody that's anywhere near her. So much so that everybody's just like, get away from her. Like, she freaks out for no reason. We don't know why. Because they don't know what's happening in her head. And so as a result, she pushes everyone away. And now she's even more lonely than she used to be. Page 353. This is the picture, right? The Bedouin, the tribe of people who live in the deserts of Africa and in the Middle East. They live in tents, as we talked about before, and they wander from place to place, looking for new places for their animals to eat. And what kind of animals did the sheik have? Oh, remember the shepherds and the little black lamb. So shepherds have sheep. There we go. One day, as Nadia passed the place where her brothers were playing, she stopped to watch them. They were playing one of the games that Hamed had taught her, but they were playing it wrong. Without thinking, Nadia called out to them, "That's not the way. Hamed said that first you jump this way, and then you jump back." Her brothers stopped their game and looked around in fear. Why? Because she said his name. Had Tariq heard Nadia say Hamed's name? But the sheik was nowhere to be seen. "Teach us, Nadia, as our brother taught you," said her smallest brother. And so she did. Then she told them of other games and how Hamed had taught her to play them. And as she spoke of Hamed, she felt an easing of the hurt within her. Now wait a minute. As she talks about him, she feels that pain that she was stuffing down inside her and not letting come out, and it caused her to go become an angry, evil person. Now, when she talks about him, she's realizing that makes her feel better. So she went on speaking of him. She went to where the women sat at their loom and spoke of Hamed. What's a loom? They use it to weave cloth together. She told them tales that Hamed had told her, and she told how he had made her laugh as he was telling them. At first, the women were afraid. Oh, I got a light problem. Let's see. At first, the women were afraid to listen to the willful girl and covered their ears. But after a time, they listened and laughed with her. Why were they afraid? Because she's talking and saying her brother's name, right? And there's the decree. They're not allowed to. Remember your father's promise of punishment, Nadia's mother warned when she heard Nadia speaking of Hamed. Cease, I implore you. Cease. What does that mean? It's not one of your vocabulary words, but I wondered if you would know. It means to stop. Cease. I implore you. Implore means to beg. Nadia knew that her mother had reason to be afraid, for Tariq, in his grief and bitterness, had grown quick-tempered and sharp of tongue. What in the world does that mean, sharp of tongue? That sends a really funny picture to my head. But it's not funny at all, is it? Sharp of tongue means he's just very angry and nasty. And he will just say anything and it could hurt your feelings real quick. He's just sharp of tongue. That means it just cuts, what he says cuts you and hurts. Not literally cuts you, thankfully, but you know, sometimes words are worse than somebody just punching us. Sometimes words can hurt and last a lot longer than if somebody were just to hit you instead. But she did not know how to tell her mother that speaking of Hamed eased the pain she felt. And so she said only, I will speak of my brother. I will. And she ran away from the sound of her mother's voice. Now, what do you think it means now to be willful? Remember in the beginning I asked you if you thought it meant to be bad. What are you thinking willful means now? Do you have any other different idea? Let's keep reading. She went to where the shepherds tended the flock and spoke of Hamed. The shepherds ran from her in fear and hid behind the sheep, but Nadia went on speaking. She told of Hamed's love for the little black lamb and how he had taught it to leap at his whistle. Soon the shepherds left off their hiding and came to listen. Then they told their own stories of Hamed and the little black lamb. The more Nadia spoke of Hamed, the clearer his face became in her mind. She could see his smile and the light in his eyes. She could hear his voice. And the clearer Hamed's voice and face became, the less Nadia hurt inside, and the less her temper flashed. At last she was filled with peace. But her mother was still afraid for her willful daughter. Again and again she sought to quiet Nadia so that Tariq's bitterness would not be turned against her. And again, Nadia tossed her head and went on speaking of Hamed. Soon, all who listened could see Hamed's face clearly before them. Okay, let's go back. Can memories keep the past alive? How do we find ways to keep them fresh in our mind? What way did Nadia find to keep the memory of her brother fresh in her mind? One day, the youngest shepherd came to Nadia's tent, calling, "Come out, Nadia, see Hamed's black lamb. It has grown so big and strong." But it was not Nadia who came out of the tent. It was Tariq. Dun, dun, dun. Not good.